Welcome back to the channel. It's been about a week. I just finished running my first ever marathon at the Honolulu Marathon. So today I want to go ahead and talk about that, tell you guys how it went, how I was able to train for it, and give a bit of a review on the Honolulu Marathon. I thought it was a great event, so we'll go over some of the details and you can decide if it's right for you. So quick backstory, I was running quite a bit, probably like 15 years ago. But I took about a 10-year break. I tried running again in 2020, and it took quite a bit of time to even be able to run a 5K. I was quite fit from cycling, but the soft tissues in my calves and my feet, they just weren't ready for running, and it took a long time to actually build up to that 5K. And then I stopped running again almost immediately until 2022. I started running about April of 2022, and I've been slowly building up since then. Back in August of 2023, I raced my first ever half marathon. Way back in the day, I'd done a few runs that were a little bit further than that, even up to about 18 miles, but I'd only done a handful of long runs, and I'd never entered a half before. The longest race I'd done prior to that point was a 10K, and I finished that race in 1:47. My training was so-so. I'd done decent training in the spring that year and then had an IT band problem and kind of laid off. And so when I showed up to the half marathon, I was not in great shape, and I was also hadn't been running that far. So that one was a pretty big eye-opener. I loved the race, but as I had felt for years prior to that, I felt like that was plenty far enough. I never wanted to go further than a half marathon, and I pretty much wrote off ever running a full. I just thought it was too long. I thought there's no way I can do it. I'm not built for it, and it does too much damage, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, the half is long enough. I'm never running a full. Well, kept running, kept building up, and then early this year, I kind of changed my mind, and I decided to enter the lottery for the New York City Marathon for the full. I'd been wanting, and I still would like to run the half, but I decided let's just go for the full and let's kind of take a leap of faith and see what happens. But like 99% of people, I got rejected from the New York City Marathon. But at that point, I'd kind of committed in my mind to taking on the challenge and taking on the necessary steps to get there. And so I talked to my brother who lives in Hawaii and said, hey, it looks like there's a marathon near your house. Like, you interested in doing it? And he was all for it. And so we both decided to enter the full marathon in Honolulu in December, entered it way back at the beginning of the year. The training did not go amazing. I ran a decent amount this spring, and then we had fire season, so got a lot of hiking and a lot of time on feet, but very little running all through the summer, which is good for base, I think. But going into about basically the first week of October, then I actually started the marathon training. So I got about, 9 weeks total. I think really 7 good weeks of marathon training come up to Honolulu. I focused really on the long run and just getting my mileage up as high as I could. The biggest week I think I got was 33 miles. And then after my 20-mile long run, I started having issues with my other IT band and had to kind of manage that and bring the mileage down coming into the race. But thankfully, we were close enough to the race at that point that I could reduce the mileage and still come in with a decent amount of confidence. So we go ahead and we fly to Hawaii. I'd done a 10-miler a couple days before. I thought week out, pretty good time to do kind of the last long run. So I do a 10-miler. It goes great, actually. Ran my fastest 10-miler ever. Would have been a great half marathon PB had I continued on, but I decided to stop it at 10 miles to kind of limit the damage. And I thought I was in the clear with the IT band. Whatever the flight influences were, something with the flight and hiking around the airport really made that IT band angry. And so by the time we got to Honolulu, I could barely walk. I was just hobbling around. We got the rental car. I'm hobbling around the next day. I could barely walk, and my wife was just like, you don't look like you're about to run a marathon. And I was like, yeah, we'll see what happens. So I got one of the better knee sleeves we found at Costco, and got some KT tape, and then I just rested as much as I possibly could, did a bunch of stretching, took some naproxen and stuff to get the inflammation down, and just kind of hoped for the best. And so I didn't run for about 4 days. We did a shakeout run 2 days before the marathon, mile and a half. I felt completely fine. So just really hoped for the best, put the knee sleeve on in the morning, and walked a mile to the start. You've got to see this race. I mean, like, most races with this many people have a wave start system. So you'll get into a specific wave, they'll let them go off in intervals, have a little break in between each interval so that people have kind of open road. This is the biggest race that I know of, and you guys may know of others, but this is the biggest one I know of that doesn't do any kind of wave start. You show up to the start line, they tell you what section you should be in, but there's no one controlling it, and you start off like it's your local 10K. And I thought that was awesome, but I can see why the wave starts are super necessary, and especially in the bigger races like New York, Chicago, because holy moly, that was the most chaotic thing I think I've ever seen in my life. By far the most people I've ever seen in one place in my life. It looked like after everybody finished, we had about 19,000 marathoners, or just shy of that, and about 8,400 10K runners. They all run together. The 10Kers run the first 10K of the marathon course. So, about 27,000 people on the start line, all starting at once. It was bananas. We got there at 4. I immediately got in the restroom line because I knew that would be an issue. Spent 30 minutes in the restroom line. We got through the restroom line, and then it took almost, I think we got to our starting position 5 or 8 minutes before the start of the race. Time crunch. Typically, I always get to places super early, and I'm always at the start line way before I need to be. That did not happen with this one. We used all of that time to get to the start line. I was supposed to be in the green start group, and yeah, I was okay with starting wherever we needed to. They run your chip time once you cross the start line, but I just felt like, man, I didn't want to be cocky, but I just felt like we needed to be further up, based on what I knew my pace should be and what I'd seen from the results, studying them from the year before. So we found a little piece of grass between the canal and the starting road, and we were able to make our way up into the green start area, or at least close to it. And I could see the start line. I felt much better about that. We were still probably 100, 150 yards back behind it. I didn't want to get too close because I don't want to get in the way of, the sub 3 hour guys and the really fast people. But as soon as the race started, I realized I'd greatly overestimated how many of those people there were. We had to do a lot of weaving and passing, and where I started from ended up being pretty good because the first mile we did in 8:55. And then by the second mile, I was up to a regular 8-minute pace. So I only had to really battle that for about a mile. And then, a few miles in, it had really opened up and had plenty of room to run, plenty of space. So if you are in that green start group, if you're trying for 3:30 at Honolulu, I would definitely recommend getting yourself up there, because you will be in kind of the top percentage of the race, and so it just makes a lot more sense for you to be up there. Okay, so let's talk about the first 10K. And originally I had a very strict plan. We'd been doing a lot of stuff in training with the nutrition. I've been working on my hydration. I had a pretty good plan, but there were things that were not working, and so before the race I came up with a more solid nutrition plan, and I had a plan for hydration. And I'd seen a lot of self-serve refill stations on the course, so I had my water bottle. I fully expected to have to refill. But as it turned out, there was a lot more cups available, and they were available a lot more often than I expected them to be. I'm not sure if I just read the map wrong, but they were basically every 2 or 3 miles. They had water available in cups that they were doing hand-ups for, and they also had Gatorade basically every other aid station, and then pretty much every aid station towards the end. So I originally thought I'd be using my bottle and skipping the first couple of water stations, But as soon as we started running, I realized it was so hot. And I was drenched with sweat. Everybody around us was just drenched with sweat. So hot, so humid, at least for what I'm used to, that I made sure I hit every single water station, and I was dumping water on my back every chance I could. I also had my bottle with element in it, and then I made a nutrition plan to take a goo every 20 minutes, which gave me 90 carbs an hour. And I was super strict to that. The math was great. You know, as you get later in the race, of course, the brain doesn't want to remember things. So it was really easy for me to remember 20, 40, 60. I'd look at my watch. If I was, 43, oh, I missed taking a gel, I'd take one. But they were really great about handing up water. And there was not nearly as many self-serve water stations as I thought there was. I think you could fill up off of where they were filling up, but they had at a couple of the stations a place that was always kind of running with a bunch of spigots, and you could pull up and fill up your bottle. But I thought that was going to be more common, and it really wasn't. So that was kind of a surprise. But we got through the first 10K. Then you go up Diamond Head, and that's kind of the infamous climb on this course. There's actually a few other climbs. There's a few small bridges, and there's a few kind of long gradual climbs. It's fairly flat though, but Diamond Head, you have to go up it. And so I just kind of managed my effort. Didn't worry too much about the pace, and just managed my effort and cruised to the top, and then went a little bit faster on the other side. I think I easily made up for it. I think I went up the Diamond Head at like 8:20 something pace and came down at like 7:45. But I really decided, especially after I realized how hot it was and after Diamond Head, to try to really nail the 8-minute pace. I was averaging 8:04 for like a long time. And at one point before the race, I had considered trying to go sub 3:30. Never run a marathon before, but thought maybe. But given the heat, around the half marathon point, I played around with a sub 8-minute pace, just barely, but decided ultimately that it was just a little bit too much effort for the conditions, and so I backed off. Really wanted to try to get through the marathon itself and finish, and so that was my focus. But we got over Diamond Head. There's a really steep downhill. The descent after Diamond Head's pretty long, and I thought, man, we have to go back up this. That sucks. And then there's a descent after that at some point that's a lot steeper than you'd expect. I hadn't heard anyone talk about it, but that, it's pretty short, but something to be aware of. But the thing I really liked about the course was that it's essentially an out and back. You do a loop in Honolulu when you do kind of the first 4 miles in the city, and then you're essentially doing an out and back. But they make it more interesting by adding miles in the neighborhood kind of north of the coast on the way out, so that by the time you flip around and start heading back towards the finish, you're way over halfway. So I really appreciated that mentally. Got through the half marathon feeling very good, just kept it very chill, tried to hold that even pace. I hit every aid station. After about 14 or 15 miles, definitely started feeling it in the legs. Could feel we were really in the race now, but kept at it. At this point, my bottle was empty because I wasn't seeing any of these refill stations, but I was staying on the nutrition. I was staying on the hydration at the aid stations. I got handed one gel throughout the entire course. I never saw any other food on the course. So that would be my huge warning to anyone who does this race, is that there was essentially no nutrition. And for me, that was fine because I had 10 gels in my pocket, and I grabbed another one just in case I blew up and I needed that last 20 minutes. But I kind of felt bad about that because there was very little food. I don't know how many people in the back got anything. So if you do this race, you are basically on your own as far as nutrition goes. Maybe they will change that in the future, but right now, that's how it is. I would not expect to get any food on this course. We get to mile 20. Some point before then, we'd flipped around. We were seeing people coming by us. I ended up seeing my brother when I was at mile 19. He was just running a slower pace than I was, and so we got to say hi. About mile 20, I was still feeling good, but now I'm starting to feel the Charlie horse coming on. And I just kept getting these little twinges in my legs, and I thought, man, this is not good. This is where it blows up. But I wasn't going to stop unless, my legs completely locked up or something. But I really felt like I needed more sodium. That's what I kind of planned for. And I had 2 more element packets on my little water bottle. And I was still not seeing any of these self-serve stations. I made a decision after like the half marathon or 10-mile point that the next one I saw I was going to use. It was going to cost me maybe 30 seconds, but I thought that's no problem. And I was going to use it, but I never saw one. And so eventually, as I'm starting to get these cramps, I made the decision to drink a cup of water and then grab another one. So I grabbed another cup of water. I unscrewed my cap while running and dumped the water into my bottle. And then I put a pack of Element in there. Now that was like barely filled half the bottle. And if you've used an Element packet, you know that was like, it was the briniest, saltiest thing I've ever drank. But I started taking sips of that, and that made a huge difference. My cramps calmed down, but I knew if I lifted my foot too high, that's when the cramps really started happening. So I was like really managing my pace. After mile 20, I'm doing like 8:20s, 8:30s, just trying to like manage this and just keep rolling. I was really using the rocker in the shoes. I couldn't really feel my legs anymore. I could feel them, they hurt like crazy, but I couldn't feel like the individual movements anymore. I was just trying to shuffle, watching my watch. I thought this is fine. We're still moving, but awful amounts of pain obviously. And then I was really worried with the cramps about going up Diamond Head. I was getting warnings everywhere, all over my legs. My quads were warning me, hamstrings, they were all like really uncertain. Never run more than 20 miles in my whole life. And here we are like 22 miles in, 23, and then you hit Diamond Head at mile 24. And people hate the fact that this hill is at this point in the race, but I can't be too mad at the organizers, to be honest, because if you look at Google Maps, there's really not a better option. Oahu is actually quite mountainous. So the fact that they were able to put a marathon course together that is this flat, I think is actually pretty impressive. But there's really no way around Diamond Head. It comes right up to the ocean. And so this little pass over the edge of it right there on the coast is basically the only way to go. Thankfully, I run a lot of hills. We live in the mountains. And so I ended up being able to run up it, which surprised me given the cramps. I thought once we go uphill, like I'm hosed, but somehow I got over the top of this thing. There's a bunch of drummers at the top, and actually that was really motivating. And then all downhill, I tried to gather a little bit more speed and then just tried to hang on all the way to the finish. Mile 23, 24, I ran over 9-minute miles, so 9 something and then close to 9:30. Those were my 2 slowest miles during the race, and that was the best I could do. No shame in that. That's what I could do, and I was like totally fine with it. Because of the fueling, I wasn't bonking. My legs were just kind of done. But then kind of got a boost going downhill and held on to kind of a low 8-minute pace, 8:11 or so, going into the finish line. Managed to get through it without, coming to a full stop or having to walk or anything. No shame, of course, in having to walk. But once I got through like 23 miles, I was like, man, if I could just get through this thing without stopping, I'd made it this far. And so I came through. The official time is 3:37:32, which means it took us like 2 minutes to cross the start line from where we started. And for me, I had said before this that I would have been 100% over the moon with anything in the 3:30s. And so I was stoked. I thought there's a crazy small chance we go low 3:30s. And I would have been totally fine with 3:45 or 4 hours, or honestly, anything finishing the marathon I was happy with. But a goal was under 3:40, and so we hit that. I was able to execute the plan. The plan worked. My knee didn't act up at all. And so I'm like completely 100% satisfied. I would like to go faster in the future, but ultimately, like, that was the best I could do on that day in those conditions. And I felt like I ran a pretty smart race. I slowed down a little bit at the end. It's not entirely perfect, but I'm pretty satisfied. If I never run another marathon, like, I can be super proud of that time and I'm proud of that performance. It's representative of, if I go out for a run and I'm just running for fun, like 7:30, 8:30 pace is where I just run for fun. And so that marathon is basically representative of my running, and also I had fun. And so I couldn't ask for anything more. I was not super emotional at the end. I was just smiling like, I can't believe that just happened. I was like, the whole, from mile 20 to mile 26, I was just in disbelief that we were actually going to run the marathon. Like I said, I didn't think I could ever do it. So it was a huge deal. I don't have any regrets. So that was 100% success. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot. Let's talk about, some of the things that are unique to Honolulu. I think it's a great thing. It has no time cutoff, which is fantastic for people that want to come out and, just finish the marathon, regardless of what kind of fitness they're in or what their background is. If you want to run a marathon, you can come to Hawaii and they will wait for you. You're not going to get kicked off the course. The ironic thing with that, though, is I don't think the course is super beginner friendly. I think there are easier courses. There's definitely not too many prettier courses. It's an amazing place to come. It's very motivating. The crowds were amazing. There's not a ton of crowds like there are in some of the bigger cities, but great crowds, great volunteers. They really did a good job. But you have a lot of heat and humidity, which is not ideal for someone who's doing a longer marathon. And you also, for some reason, have no nutrition. I've done loads and loads of races. Never been to a race this big, period, but I've never been to a race even close to this prestigious that didn't have on-course nutrition. That's really confusing to me. But I think if you know that, it's okay. But the big thing that you can't get around if you're going to be doing a long marathon is the heat and the humidity. And so at 3.5 hours, 4.5 hours, I think you're okay. I stayed around and watched a lot of people finish, and if you were finishing after 4.5 hours, it got very, very hot. So anybody that was doing that, it's really to your disadvantage. And especially after mile 15, you saw a lot of ambulances staged. There was a lot of people, especially talking to my brother who was a little further back. A lot of people went to the hospital due to heat issues. So that doesn't mean a beginner can't come and run this. That doesn't mean you can't come enjoy this. And even if you're running a long marathon, I think if you're prepared for that weather condition, totally fine. But your hydration needs to be super dialed. I would say it's a great time. Definitely come out and do it, but just be ready that it is hot. The expo was great. Not the biggest expo I've ever been to, ironically. But it was really streamlined. It had all the things you need, not a ton of stuff you didn't. There wasn't like a crazy amount of vendors in there. They had lots of merch that you could buy. Hoka was there selling shoes if you needed to replace a pair of shoes. The course was gorgeous, beautiful. And then, after the race, you walk back to your hotel. Maybe that night you go swimming or you go down to the beach. I can't think of a better place to run a first marathon. At least from a vibe perspective. So as long as you do your preparation, and don't just wing it, I think it's a great place to come, especially if you are prepared, but you're on the slower end and you have issues with those time cutoffs. Really, really great race to come to. It's slow course. It's just not maybe the fastest out there. And it doesn't have a ton of climbing, but it has enough. All right, if you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. I'll try to answer as many of them as I can. I'm gonna do a video on the Nike Zoom Fly 6s after running a marathon in them. I think I'm ready to give them a full review. So watch out for that, and we'll see you next time.